Do you want to reduce your energy bills? Or maybe you want to use greener energy? Go solar and get a discount. Right now, Which members can get a 7.5% discount on solar panels and their installation if you use Heatable, a Which trusted trader approved service. You can also include a storage battery and EV charger, handy if you're looking at making the switch to an electric car. To make use of this exclusive offer, simply head to which.co.uk/solar-offer. That's which.co.uk/solar-offer before the 30th of September 2025. And if you're not already a Which member, you can grab a year's membership for 50% off the usual price. To do that, go to which.co.uk/podcast offer to get involved. Start your solar journey today. Go solar and get a discount with Which.
Today, we'll be deep diving into summer skin health, unpacking the need-to-knows about using SPF in the sunshine. Welcome to the Which podcast. I'm Lucia Ariano, and joining us on today's podcast, giving you expert advice and recommendations to help you live your best life every day. We have Dr. Neal Rimmer, a senior scientific advisor here at Which. Hello, Neal.
Hello.
And Dr. Justine Kluk, a consultant dermatologist based in London. Hello, Justine.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. I'm actually really excited for this show. And we've already started chatting off air. I suppose I just wanted to start by asking you, Justine, there's so much out there. It's a bit of a minefield. Is it as complicated, getting your skincare routine or what to use right?
It doesn't have to be, but there are lots of, I think there's lots of noise around what you should be using for your skin, depending on how old you are, depending on what time of year it is, depending on what your goals are. And I think that can make it really confusing. I think also the number of products available is very overwhelming for people. So I spend a lot of time at my clinic telling my patients that actually it's not as complicated as it sounds, which I think is a big relief, because it can feel sometimes that you need a degree to try and decode, what you should be using for your skin.
Literally, there's so much out there, and I don't know about you, but I get given so much through advertising as well, and it's really hard to know what to trust. And so many brands as well. It's really hard to know which ones to trust.
Yeah, and I think also, increasingly lots of brands closing down because actually I think there's so many products, and I think some of the time we're sort of obsessed with newness as well. So I think new things come up, people get bored of a particular trend, then another trend, becomes sort of the thing of the moment, and then everyone moves on again. So yeah, I think brands are struggling to keep up as well. So consumers and brands.
And we're going to talk a lot about sun cream and SPF today, but it'd be nice just to get a little bit more context first. So to start quite generally, and you mentioned your clinic there. I'm really interested to hear, what are some of the problems or the most common problems that people come to you with?
So we were saying before there are about 2,000 or 3,000 different dermatological diagnoses. I realise there's quite a big difference between 2,000 and 3,000 there, but there are many. But probably about 90% of the time in dermatology clinics, there's sort of the same 5 or 10 conditions that we're treating a lot. I'm a specialist in acne. That's my passion in life. I had acne as a teenager and sort of made it my mission to. So we're in this together. But yeah, so I sort of made it my mission to try and make people's experience of having acne and getting their acne treated better. So I want to say I probably spend most of my time treating acne, but the other common things we see in our clinic and in a general dermatology setting will be things like eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, melasma, vitiligo, alopecia, skin cancer, and precancerous skin conditions. These are some of the common things, infections.
That's such a broad array that you've just mentioned there. That's only a few of the many thousand.
Yeah, and I think as I was saying before we started recording, one of the really cool things about being a dermatologist is we're in this semi-unique position where we look after people from their first days of their lives till the end of their lives. So we look after children and adults. There are a few other specialties that do this, like ophthalmologists, for example, or ENT doctors, but most other specialties just deal with kids or with adults. And in dermatology, we also do surgery as well as being physicians. So we can diagnose and treat skin cancers, for example. So it's a very varied specialty. And so it's always something different, which makes it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you kind of something about routines, about day and night routines that, products that you might suggest. But as you've mentioned, obviously, there's such a variety. So, I mean, what's your advice there? I suppose maybe some general advice or...
Yeah. So it's way more simple than people think it is. I think there are some sort of ground rules or basics. I sort of call them the necessaries that everyone should have, and there are a lot of the stuff that confuses people are what we'll call the nice to haves. Okay, so the necessaries will be something to wash your body with, and something to wash your face with. They may be the same product for some people. If you're my husband, you'll just use shampoo for your washing your face, washing your hair, washing your body. That's one product. I don't recommend that.
You do see some of those kind of all-in-ones.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sort of extreme side. But no, I would say you'd have one product for washing your body, let's say. You'd have a product for washing your face. For me, that's normally like a nice gentle cleanser. I would recommend it sort of suits most people, like milky or gel cleanser. A moisturizer. A lot of us now have heard the term skin barrier and this idea of looking after your skin barrier. So your skin is keeping moisture in so you don't sort of desiccate like a coconut, but also it's keeping things in the environment out that we want to protect ourselves against, like infections and allergens and UV rays, which I'm sure we'll come on to. And so we have to look after our skin barrier, and moisturizer is one of those things because it calms the immune system in the skin and it looks after our skin microbes and keeps things balanced. So I would say moisturizer is essential. Sunscreen, and we'll talk, I'm sure, about when you should use sunscreen and who needs it. But that I would say is another essential to protect our skin. Those are really the main things, that we need. We may need a moisturizer for our body. Of course, we'll need a sunscreen for our body at some times of the year as well. Everything else is a nice to have, pretty much. Serums with antioxidant, that is a nice to have if you want to slow signs of skin aging. Brightening serums, that's nice to have if you want to even out, your complexion, if you have darker patches. There are various hydrating, like a lot of these things are serums, these nice to haves. Like there are lots of hydrating serums, which is basically just a different format of having a moisturizer. No one is going to suffer if they don't have an exfoliating scrub, if they don't have a sheet mask. So those, and really, which cleanser, moisturizer or sunscreen you use kind of depends a bit on preference and a bit on, we'll say, your skin type, although I think sometimes it can be misleading if we think of skin as only being oily or only being dry or being, normal. I don't know what normal means. Most of us are a bit of a combination, and also our skin is a very reactive, dynamic organ. So what your skin is like this month might be a bit different to what it's like, in December when it's colder. So, in general, if you have drier skin, you might want a creamier cleanser, and you might want a thicker moisturizer, and you might want a sunscreen that's less irritating to the skin, and you might want to use fewer products, because the more things you use, firstly, the more likely you are to develop allergies to things, and secondly, the more likely you are to have irritation. If you have oilier skin, you might want to firstly use fewer layers, use lighter weight formulations, so gels or lotions or serums rather than heavier creams or ointments. When you're choosing your moisturizer or your sunscreen, you might also want to use a foaming cleanser, because they tend to remove a bit more grease from the skin, depending on what detergent's using it. So there's some sort of variation there, but the sort of core products you might use would broadly be the same in terms of the necessaries. I could keep going, but
I could keep listening. So
I'll stop.
How long do we have? I don't know. And I just wanted to ask you as well, as you were talking about all those, the must-haves, are there any specific ingredients, or the word actives gets used a lot, Maybe if you could talk to us about what that means. Any specific ingredients or actives we should be looking for?
So I sort of sweepingly will say the actives. It really depends how you define them, but I suppose most people will use actives to describe certain ingredients. So sometimes I think the word actives and ingredients can be a little bit confused with each other. And of course, even those necessary products or must-have products I mentioned have ingredients in them. So you might, there's been a big focus, I'd say, in the last 5 years, maybe more, on specific ingredients. I think that came with, the arrival of products like The Ordinary, where they called out things like salicylic acid or hyaluronic acid on the labeling. Like, those ingredients have been used in skincare products forever, but no one really knew what they were because they were just on a long list of ingredients at the back. But so the sort of focus on ingredients is bigger. And I think, you'll hear of ceramides and moisturizers and in cleansers, for example, but we don't think of those as being actives. So I suppose the first thing to answer your question is actives and ingredients means different things. Actives usually to a dermatologist would mean will usually be in these products that are in the sort of nice to have category. So they may be things like, let's think of retinoids, for example, or alpha hydroxy acid or beta hydroxy acid, or what else, like vitamin C. These are the sort of things people usually refer to as actives. And these are sort of targeted ingredients or ingredient pairings, which are used to, I suppose, achieve a particular goal in the skin beyond just moisturizing it and protecting it from the sun and cleaning it. So they may be used with an intention of slowing signs of skin aging, of brightening the complexion, of reducing pigmentation, of reducing redness, of providing an extra moisture boost, of making the skin smoother. So, and some of these ingredients will have multiple benefits like that, boosting collagen or whatever it might be. So those are sort of usually what are referred to as the actives. Making the distinction between necessaries and nice to haves doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that I'm poo-pooing these nice to haves, right? Okay. It's just saying that sometimes people feel that they, if I don't have a routine that includes salicylic acid and a retinoid and a vitamin C and niacinamide and, then somehow I'm missing a trick and, my face is going to fall off too early and, I'm going to be disadvantaged, and you can sort of get, fear of missing out there. I definitely use some actives. Some of them are over the counter, some of them are prescription, because they will be achieving a desired objective for me in terms of what I want to do with my skin. So I want to have my skin looking as firm and smooth and even in complexion for as long as possible, particularly because I got loads of sun as a child in South Africa. So I'm already fighting, lots of cumulative sun damage. So I will use a retinoid in the evening, and I will use an antioxidant serum. Mine has vitamin C in the morning. So I'm not poo-pooing those things. I'm just saying that no one is, like, they're not absolutely necessary, but they can be utilized to kind of target certain goals. And what's really important is for a person to be clear, I suppose, what their goals are, so they can choose the right actives for them. And then it's a little bit easier to work out, what to put in your routine. You might include an active, for example, in the evening to begin with. And if your skin is tolerating that and still needs more, you're not achieving your objective yet, you might add another active in the morning, for example.
Well, shall we get into one of the must-haves then, which is SPF or sunscreen? Neal, shall we bring you in now? Are they the same things?
In the UK, I think also worldwide, sunscreens and SPF is commonly interchangeable, but they're actually not the same. SPF is sun protection factor, which actually relates to how much UVB is being filtered out. And that's what the number relates to on the bottle. And I think that's what everyone pictures when they, or thinks about when they see sunscreen in the supermarket or online. Now, sunscreens themselves are actually a bit more broader term. It covers everything from creams, liquids, sprays, roll-ons, but sunscreen actually applies to protecting you against UVB and UVA, so it's more broad spectrum UV protection. So it is like you've got to protect yourself against both types of UV light. But most commonly, because the number is on the bottle, that's what everyone thinks of and uses when referring to the product, when actually that's only referring to one element of the protection.
So when you're shopping then for sunscreen, what exactly should we be looking for?
So in the UK, it's commonly recommended, like by the NHS, Cancer Research UK, that we always use a high SPF protection. So this is 30 and above. That'll deliver sufficient protection for you in general if you're using it correctly. UVA, the NHS also recommends that we use the a minimum of 4 stars to have sufficient protection against UVA. And those are what you really should look out for, is the ones that products are highly rated, got the high numbers and high number of stars to deliver the adequate protection for you.
It's been a bit confusing over time, though, hasn't it? And I think because the SPF number, as you say, is like really easy to see at the front of the sunscreen bottle. So you can see if it says 6, 10, 30, 50, etc., which I think is why the term SPF has become kind of ubiquitous and people use it instead of the word sunscreen. Whereas the UVA, I think, is a bit more confusing. Even as a dermatologist, when I was training, I found it a bit confusing to understand the UV rating because there are different ways that people will display the UVA rating. I hadn't understood initially that the star rating was a Boots construct that they had created to help consumers quantify the level of UVA rating. Some countries will use this UVA+++ system, and then there's the European UVA in a circle, which you might see, which actually doesn't tell you much about the UVA protection, apart from that the UVA protection is at least a third of the UVB proportionally, which, what does that mean? How do we know if it's enough? So I think the star rating is the most helpful, but it is a bit kind of confusing for people, isn't it?
Definitely. I think with sun creams, because throughout history, the development of the products, they're getting a lot more different labels. Everyone presents everything slightly differently. You've got primary sun creams versus secondary sun creams, which are just a product in themselves with added UV filter. So it's a very complicated nature, and it's not really created the best environment for the consumer, especially sun cream, as you said, is a necessity. You really should be using it because, and to touch back on what you mentioned earlier, sun creams are that preventative treatment. My personal view on it is prevention is easier than the cure, because you're trying to regain something that you've already lost. In that case, so using sun cream or sunscreen is a lot better for preventing that damage happening to you. And the market, I think, is so saturated now that it distracts and pulls away from what the real meaning and the real purpose for sun creams were, which is that UVA and UVB protection.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I can think that it gets even, you remind me of something else while you're talking, it gets even more complicated because not only is there decoding the label and what is UVA and UVB, you'll hear about visible light as well as something that you want to protect your skin against, and some sunscreens protect better than others. And then there's the SPF in other products. So, is the SPF in my makeup or moisturizer enough? And then there's whether it's water resistant or not. And then it's whether it's a lotion or if it's a spray or if it's, a powder or something like this. And it is really sort of confusing to try and work out what's best, isn't it?
Well, it's a really good point you raised there, because whether or not the SPF in your tinted moisturizer, your face cream is enough is a really good question. I'd like to ask you that. Is it ever enough?
It can be. It depends how much you apply. So my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that to be able to put an SPF claim on the product, you have to believe, and I suppose have tested, that the product offers that level of SPF. So if your foundation says SPF 50, you've got to be able to believe that if you put the right quantity of that makeup on, you're going to get SPF 50 protection, and that it would be the same SPF 50, whether it's in your moisturizer or if it's in your dedicated sunscreen product. There is some nuance there, though, because we were just talking about UVA protection, and most dedicated sunscreen products these days will offer you that UVA protection, and it will have one of those UVA marks that we've talked about, or it will say broad spectrum. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think foundations or makeups necessarily give UVA protection as well. I know that they might say SPF 50 in the foundation, but I think that's the UVB protection, not necessarily the UVA. I'm sure the tint in it also gives some protection against visible light. So I think that's one difference. I think another difference is that a lot of sunscreens are a bit more waterproof or sweat proof or a little bit more rub resistant, maybe some better than others. but makeup is not designed to be used in the same way, and endure the same conditions as, if we were going to the beach to use sunscreen. So I think maybe, it might rub off or wear off more quickly. But the most important thing is we just don't put enough on. So if you're supposed to put on, let's say, a quarter to half a teaspoon of sunscreen for your face, neck and ears to get a thick enough layer of the product on your skin so that you are actually getting the SPF and the UVA protection that it says on the label, that's quite a lot of foundation. And, most of us don't even put enough sunscreen on most of the time. I think, it's estimated that people put on, less than half of the amount they're supposed to. Anyway, with sunscreen, and that's stuff that rubs in. If you had to kind of smush into your face and your ears and your hairline, half a teaspoon of foundation, that's not going to look very good. So most of us are not putting that amount on. So I would normally say to my patients, lovely if your foundation's got some SPF in or your tinted moisturiser does, super, but you're not going to rely on that on its own in spring and summertime, or if you're on your holidays, you're going to put your sunscreen on first and then you can put this on top.
And you mentioned there spring and summer. What about autumn and winter? Should we be wearing sunscreen all year round?
Which we've had discussions with a lot of different experts and entities like the Cancer Research UK. And the general advice that you should follow is if the UV index, which is like the measure of how intense the UV light is in the environment, you should really use SPF, sun cream in general. See, I'm falling for it. This marketing works.
It's contagious.
Yes.
Yeah.
With sunscreen, you should really use it when its UV index is around 3 or above, because that's the level that's going to harm you. Below, when it's 2 and 1, it's usually not going to do much to you or harm you. So the general advice is that you should really check what the UV index is and apply sunscreen when it's 3 and above. And that's like I think an 11-point scale from very low to very high. Now, may have to rely on the dermatologist, but I know that some people do use sunscreen all year round. I'm one of those people as well. But I'll be a bit more cosmetic usage because UV light does differ across the year. It's more intense in summer and spring and bits of autumn, but when it gets to the winter months, it's not as intense. So those levels drop off, but you're still encountering UV light, but it's at a lower level.
Yes, I think it's actually the more we know about this, the more difficult it gets to explain, actually. When I was training to be a dermatologist, is strictly sort of in a medical setting, we used to tell people to wear sunscreen in spring and summer. That was the advice. And then when I think there's been a sort of explosion in interest in skincare and sun creams over the last 10 years, suddenly the sort of messaging was where everyone should wear sunscreen every day of the year. And I think we're now moving to something that may be a little bit more nuanced than that, but I think the terms are not entirely sort of fleshed out and clear at this moment, because I think that there are sort of a couple of variables. One is time of year. So UV levels are definitely going to be lower in autumn and winter than they are in spring and summer. Not nothing, but lower. So is it reasonable to say that everyone should be wearing sunscreen all throughout the year? The other thing is our skin colour makes a big difference as well, and the risk to us from the sun and the risk of things we might miss out on, for example, vitamin D, if we are overzealous with sun protection in certain skin colours. So I think we're realising that probably there isn't a one-size-fits-all message. But, we have to be really careful to communicate this responsibly, because we want to make sure that the people who really will benefit from the sunscreen continue to use it, and that the people who may benefit from using it less understand when and why. So if I've made that any more confusing for you, it's because it can be a bit confusing, but I can maybe put a little bit of sort of flesh on the bones there, which is that one of the main reasons why people will wear sunscreen, let's talk from a safety perspective, you were calling it a necessity, which it is to protect our skin from sunburn and also to prevent skin cancer, so to reduce damage to the skin from the sun. And, that's absolutely clear that if the UV index is 3 or higher, there's enough solar radiation where you are at that time that you should, that your skin could be at risk of sun damage. That tends to kind of correspond with March to October, let's say in the UK, that's the time where the UV index is probably going to get that high. That's the highest risk time of getting sunburn and potentially subjecting your skin to damage that might lead to skin cancer later in life. So a lot of people will benefit from wearing sunscreen during those months. Potentially not so much benefit, though, if you have naturally brown or dark brown skin, because you're very unlikely to get sunburn because the melanin in your skin provides you some protection. When I say very unlikely to get sunburn, I mean in the UK. So the UV index in the UK only ever really gets up to about 7. People who have brown skin or dark brown skin have more melanin in their skin. That confers a bit of extra protection compared to someone who has white skin like me. So actually, the British Association of Dermatologists says that if you have very dark skin, very dark brown skin, maybe your skin gives you up to 7 times more protection than if you have white skin. And if you have brown skin, maybe 4 times more. So actually a UV index of 7 would mean I'm very likely to burn, but someone with very dark brown skin, it's the equivalent of a UV index of 1. They may not even need sunscreen. So it see what I mean? It can be that, it can be a bit different. So the advice the British Association of Dermatologists gives, the latest advice on their website for people with skin of colour is, if you're in the UK in spring and summer, from a sun damage and skin cancer perspective, it may not be necessary to wear sunscreen. If you're traveling and the UV index is going up to 11, you probably do need to wear sunscreen. If you're out in very intense sun for a long time, you probably want to wear sunscreen. And they even go so far as to saying that, if you get a sunburn in the UK, actually that's rare enough if you have very dark brown skin that maybe you have some sort of sun sensitivity condition and that needs to be investigated. So I think we really need much clearer advice on helping people to not have that decision to make on their own, like, what do I do today? If we're talking about other reasons for wearing sunscreen, like, for example, to manage pigmentation on the skin, and people who have black or brown skin are much more likely to suffer with hyperpigmentation, which is where they can get these sort of darker or deeper marks on their skin that can take a really long time to go away. They certainly would want to wear sunscreen in spring and summer because that is going to, inevitably going to get darker. So if we're sort of moving away from sunburn and skin cancer, probably people with skin of colour would want to wear sunscreen to protect their skin from pigmentation. Another reason for wearing sunscreen would be to slow the signs of skin aging.
I was just about to ask you about
that. And some people will say, well, actually, sun damage accumulates over the course of a person's life, and I realise that I'm unlikely to get a sunburn or skin cancer if I don't wear sunscreen in autumn and winter, but I want to keep my UV exposure as minimal as possible over time, so I might decide to wear sunscreen all throughout the year and even in spring and summer when the UV index is lower than 3. So there are all these different layers. I think, some of the other situations where people might need to wear sunscreen, more often or more throughout the year, or have a lower threshold for wearing it, are if they have a skin condition that is aggravated by sun exposure, like rosacea, for example, or there's certain types of eczema that are aggravated by the sun. If they have a condition where their skin might burn more easily, so a condition like vitiligo, where you have these depigmented white patches on the skin. If you're someone who has a personal or family history of skin cancer, or you have lots of moles, you might want to have a lower threshold for putting sunscreen on. If you have a suppressed immune system, so because you've had an organ transplant or something like this, you may be at higher risk of skin cancer regardless of your skin colour. So you might also have a lower threshold for putting sunscreen on. So it's complicated. To make all of that more simple, what I tend to say in my clinic is definitely wear the sunscreen in spring and summer. And I tend to tell everyone to do that regardless of what their reasons are. And then I say, if you're really motivated to slow the signs of skin aging or you have a medical need, you might also wear sunscreen at other times of the year.
It is very complicated, but super helpful to hear all this context because, it's just so hard to cut through and to really trust any of the advice you get when there's so much.
Yeah. I feel a bit guilty in answering that, actually, because it's a really long and complex and little bit of a long-winded answer, I appreciate. But actually, I hope people don't listen to this and think, oh my, it's even worse than I thought and I'm even more confused. I suppose the main message to take from it is, if it's confusing for me as a dermatologist to have to try and explain it, it is a bit confusing. And I think we do need much clearer messaging for people so that they really do know which type of sunscreen is best for their particular skin type at this time of year, given any risk factors that they might have and given any goals that they might have. And the Australians have done a really good job with this, I think. I believe it was in 2023 they revised their guidelines, and they have really tried to sort of create different categories to try and make sun protection advice a bit more tailored, depending on what the person's skin type is, what their risk factors are, etc. And that makes a lot more sense because we don't want to oversimplify, but on the other hand, we don't want to scare people.
Saving for retirement can feel daunting. The same goes for managing your money once you've stopped working. That's why we've created an 8-week newsletter series breaking down what you need to consider, both pre and post-retirement, into bite-sized chunks. If you sign up to our free retirement newsletters, for 8 weeks we'll send you an email full of expert guidance to help you take control of your retirement planning and give you the confidence to make smart decisions. We'll help you get to grips with your pension, teach you how to boost your income, and explain more about care options. It doesn't matter when you sign up either. Your 8 weeks of advice will start whenever you sign up. So what are you waiting for? Head to which.co.uk/retirement newsletters, all one word, to get up to speed on everything you need to know for retirement.
Okay, Neal, can we hear a quick word on our sunscreen testing? Our testing is a great way for people to cut through and know which brands they can trust or which particular products they can trust and which ones fail our test. So can you talk to us a bit about what we do?
So with our testing, there are 3 main elements. Our application test, determining SPF, as well as determining UVA protection. Now, focusing on how the levels of SPF and UVA, we follow international and British standards, and they're done at independent laboratories. With SPF, the test requires at least 10 volunteers, and we apply a small amount of sunscreen to the back of these volunteers, and we use a lamp and shine that lamp onto the back, and we actually determine how the minimum level of UV light that is required to generate erythema, which is sunburn to everyone else, and that's where it's slight reddening, and we actually determine the minimum amount with and without sun cream, and the ratio between those two values is actually the SPF number. With UVA, this involves using a spectrophotometer, which is a fancy device that detects light, essentially, and specific wavelengths. So essentially, with UVA, we shine UVA light into the spectrophotometer and measure how much UVA light is absorbed via the sun cream. And that's just a very summarized version of the 2 standards. And that allows us to detect, measure and quantify the SPF and the UVA. We also do application testing, which is a blind test where we get volunteers to try out the sun creams and get them to rate on a variety of different qualities, from ease of application, ease of absorption, tackiness, greasiness, odour, any visible streaks or marks that are left over by the sun cream. And in our testing, to get Best Buy, you need to pass both the UVA and SPF requirements, as well as get 5 stars. But anything that fails to deliver on either SPF, claimed SPF, or UVA, then we label it as a don't buy.
And it's quite shocking because we have, to my memory, we found don't buys every single year of testing.
Yeah, so I think in the last 4 or 5 years, we've encountered 12 different products that have actually not delivered on either SPF or UVA, or even both of them on some occasions. So our testing does reveal the products that do fail to deliver those minimum levels.
And I should mention here that all of these reviews are available to Which members. And if you're not a member, you can sign up with 50% off your first year at which.co.uk/podcast offer. And we do have some results coming out in the coming weeks, don't we? And including the any don't buys, which we don't know officially yet. Well, I don't know, which will be available to everybody, won't they?
Yes, we'll be publishing our this year's round of testing later this month.
I'm going to suggest another category for your consumer testing, which is things that don't leave yellow marks on your clothes or your swimsuits. I like that added in for future years.
I think in previous years we actually did side stories. I think one was either last year or the year before. We actually did a little investigation about do sun creams still do that, and what's the best methodology to
remove it.
Remove it. So we have a look at a little ad hoc testing.
Okay.
I've also found sunscreen has kind of removed, like, I suppose, whatever was on a metal chain, like made the copper come through. And I've definitely find that when I take off my makeup at night, sometimes I think it's the SPF, it's a bit yellow on my cotton pad. So maybe it does still happen. But to end, it would be really great to just hear any notes of final advice, perhaps on what to look out for in SPF or any general advice based on what we've spoken about today. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I can start us off. I think I'm going to give this one because as someone who has struggled with breakouts, like, 90% of people in their teens and 20s and lots of adult women who come to see me in the clinic, a lot of people will say that they don't want to wear sunscreen because they're worried it's going to give them acne or give them breakouts. So I think I will start there to say that that sunscreens are, there's so many different ones out there these days. Look for terms like non-comedogenic on the package, and that means non-pore blocking, and that may, tell you that the brand's thinking about oily or acne-prone skin. So everyone can wear sunscreen even if they have acne. So that's a sort of one of the most common questions I get asked. Yeah, I think that's mine.
I'm pleased you touched on that because I did want to ask you that, but we're running out of time. And Neal, is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Yes, so whilst we discussed earlier that sunscreen is a necessity for your skincare regimen, my advice would be that it's only one of 3 elements that you need to deal with. The other one is using clothing or other protective layers like sunglasses, hats, UV protective clothing to also provide protection, because you're not going to be able to get sun cream everywhere. Yeah. You don't want it everywhere, but you're going to need that protection. So there are other methods to protect you, like clothing and so on. And finally, the other recommendation is you should try to avoid the sunlight when it's at its hottest in the middle of the day. Seek shade so that you're getting protection from multiple angles. It's not just, don't rely on one. It's a multifaceted approach that you need to deliver, to use.
And just one quick mention of something I wanted to ask you earlier, but as I said, we're running out of time. And I suppose also not to miss certain areas. I know you've recently done a video for Which talking about most commonly missed places. What are some of those quickly before we leave? Yes,
so there's many areas that people tend to forget about. So remember to apply sun cream onto your eyelids and under your eyebrow. People forget their ears, the back of their hands, because you're always washing your hands, so it's easy to rub off. You need to remember to apply there. Under your armpits, your feet, back of the knees, especially if it's shorts and t-shirt weather. There's areas that you will forget about, but these are common areas that people tend to forget.
And just to add that at the top of your scalp, particularly if your hair's not as thick as it once was.
Always have a cap in my bag.
Exactly.
Well, what an episode. We easily could have spoken for another hour or day. But thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Which, the UK's consumer champion. You can find plenty more advice about what we discussed today in the show notes. There you'll also find a link to become a Which member for 50% off the usual price, an offer exclusively available to you, our podcast listeners. Joining Which will not only give you access to our product reviews, our app, one-to-one personalised buying advice, and every issue of Which magazine across the year, but you'll also be helping us to make life simpler, fairer and safer for everyone. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you'll be notified whenever we release a new episode of Which Money, Which Shorts, or any other podcast that we make for you. And if you want to get in touch with us, then follow us on social media at Which UK or drop us an email to podcast@which.co.uk. See you next time.
If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.